Hello friend, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm excited to be talking about the game Sea of Stars. And before we dive in, I just wanted to say that if you like the content, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support means so much to a small creator such as myself. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on this video and the future ones, so please consider joining. When I had my first opportunity to take a look at Sea of Stars, I was instantly brought back to some of my childhood favorite JRPGs, whether that was Dragon Quest, Suikoden, or Chrono Trigger. Especially Chrono Trigger, of course. The game looked to be really attempting to replicate the magic of the turn-based combat and pixel art golden age, of JRPGs, which was the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. And even people like Yasunori Mitsuda was along for the ride, who was the composer for Chrono Trigger and Xenogears, kind of bringing some of his music and style and flair to the game. And once I saw it winning awards and receiving accolades from critics, I was immediately intrigued. Something else that really pulled me into the prospect of picking this game up was the opportunity to play it cooperatively with my wife. That was an exciting feature that I saw them bringing to the title. And so on top of all the great things I had heard about it, and now having beaten 4 of 2023 Game Awards Independent Best Game nominees, including this title, I feel like I now have a bit of a better sense of the game, and I'm excited to share my thoughts with you on Sea of Stars. To first just give you a little premise of the title. So Sea of Stars is a turn-based JRPG that aims to blend nostalgic 90s era vibes of JRPGs with modern game design sensibilities. And you'll play as Zale and Valerie, who are 2 children of the solstice, which is a warrior group who wield the powers of the moon and the sun. And their mission is to stop an ancient evil known as the Fleshmancer, whose monstrous creations currently threaten the world. The game was released in August of 2023, developed and published by the studio Sabotage Studios, who is the same team behind the critically acclaimed game The Messenger, which was a kind of retro-style ninja platformer that earned praise for its clever genre shifts and tight gameplay. I haven't actually had the chance to play that yet, so getting to play this game and kind of experience it gave me a little taste of what the studio is all about and has made me interested in picking The Messenger up. Built in Unity, Sea of Stars was really aiming towards modernizing classic RPG mechanics while preserving the more retro aesthetics of the style. And Sabotage Studios really aimed to create a spiritual successor to games like Chrono Trigger, but with innovations like co-op combat, dynamic lighting, but all doing that within a 2D based world. All that considered, I was really thinking, all right, well, count me in. What am I missing here? And so let's talk about a few aspects of the title, and the one that I really want to hone in on is the gameplay here in Sea of Stars, and kind of kick it off there. Combat in Sea of Stars is as you would imagine. It's turn-based with a few modern twists such as timed hits, combo moves, and spell interrupts. On paper, it's a system that really tries to blend classic JRPG mechanics with more active engagement. But in practice, it often feels more like it's missing the strategic depth that could have made it truly compelling. You're mostly just attacking, using a skill, which is just attacking again more fancifully, or healing. And I would say even then, healing itself feels almost kind of pointless, because when you're in these fights, enemies tend to focus on taking down one character at a time and just lobbing and hitting them to no end. And so a lot of that becomes pointless, because if these enemies are focusing so tightly on one character, and also the game has a mid-battle revive automatically for characters who go down, well, then there's really no threat of a game over, right? And so that mechanic alone removes a lot of the tension from the encounters, and so you don't really need to worry about healing items or defensive buffs, which don't really exist in a great sense anyway. This game also has a frustrating tendency to allow enemies to survive with 1 hit point. And I don't know if it's just bad luck or a game design choice, but it happened constantly throughout my playthrough of the game. You'll land what should have been like the ultimate finishing blow on an enemy, only for that enemy to hang on by a thread. And these damage numbers are high. It's like you're doing 100 plus points of damage and somehow, oh, well, 107, it should have been 108. Sorry for you. I guess the enemy's still alive and is going to now pull off whatever additional ultimate or attack or prolong the battle. And so this was only exacerbated by the fact that the battles themselves are very numerous and frequent throughout the course of the game, and as I mentioned, the animations and special moves all take a significant amount of time to execute. So while you're playing it, especially in very long sessions, you're going to begin to feel that fatigue that battle fatigue a lot earlier on than I would have anticipated. Another big feature of the battle system is these special moves. So enemies have special moves just like your characters do, and these can be debuffed or canceled by hitting specific types of damage against an enemy. But many of them, such as the Hex Shield, are quite a sore spot in the game. So later on in the title, there's this skill called Hex Shield that was driving me crazy because the shield creates a barrier around enemies, and it takes a solid 4 or 5 hits to eliminate the barrier. And that must be destroyed before you can land any damage on them. And the way that these special moves occur is a little number counter goes above the enemy's head and it says, hey, 2. So you have 2 turns effectively to eliminate the special move and counter it or cancel it out. And, a lot of these battles, you start the battle and that counter is immediately won, which means this turn you have to pull something out that will take out their bar. And for the Hex Shield specifically, there was really not a lot of strategic opportunities to do so. So it's always around the first turn that these are getting activated. And then, of course, as I mentioned, these 5 turns really drag out the battle. You get into this prolonged fight right from the start for literally no experience. Takes 3 or 4 minutes to resolve, and you're just sitting there just spamming attack, trying to get it over. And even when you often counter enemy power moves, especially in boss battles, they often regain their advantage immediately or start the battle with it, as I mentioned, which makes these counters feel useless. And what I mean by that is, if you take out all the tiles and you break it, then you cancel their spell, but then literally on that next turn, they get to run that special power again, assuming that in that turn, you can't once again eliminate all the tiles. And so, that's kind of dragging on the overall gameplay experience. The way the game expects you to deal with these situations is by boosting your attacks. And so how these work is that your main characters have a standard attack, but if you boost it up, then they gain these magical abilities to their hits, which can help you eliminate further tiles in the overall enemy's arsenal that would cancel or debuff the attack. So sometimes, yes, you do need a boost, but when these counters are happening on 1, that means that you have to be able to initiate a early advantage in the fight by grapple hooking into the enemy or attacking them before they can attack you on the main map before the fight begins. And so that will drop a little boost out that you can use. But if you miss that, you're just going to be stuck watching them kind of unleash their attack regardless. And so it kind of leaves you in this feeling of, hey, it just really doesn't matter if I'm prioritizing the strategy, since I can't really capitalize on it or be rewarded from taking another path except seeking the highest DPS I can against an enemy. So I think there were some really unique ideas here in the combat space, but I don't feel like they were fully realized, and a lot of the unique development ideas for these kind of put me in a place where I wasn't having particular fun in the late stages of the game because the battles were just getting drawn out, and I wasn't having these Edison light bulb goes off moments where I said, oh gosh, I can do this in the fight and that'll make it more engaging and fun. So I just didn't feel particularly invested in the combat as a solo player. Now, one of the ways in which I think this game really redeems its combat and gameplay is in its aspects related to co-op. So one of the more unique and modernized features in Sea of Stars is its co-op integration, which isn't just like having a second player run along behind you and then initiate attacks. But there's a lot going on here. It's a refreshing layer to the traditional turn-based RPG that Sabotage was working with when producing the game. So while it can be played solo, it also allows for that second player to jump in and actively participate in exploration and combat and just being part of the entire experience playing the game. Not as like a second passenger, but has their hands on the wheel as well, which I thought was really cool and satisfying. So it's not a passive experience. It keeps things like timed hits, combo attacks, and defensive reactions all on the laps of both players to participate in for both players' actions, which I thought was really cool because everyone stays engaged throughout the battles and throughout the course of the whole game, rather than kind of relegating a backseat role at any particular time to either person. Whereas if it's my turn in battle, well, then I'm focused on the battle and what's going on. And then my wife's turn, then maybe I'm texting on my phone or scrolling Reddit or something. And so I really did enjoy that together we could experience the whole game and not feel like we were only seeing one half of it, which I thought was really exciting. And so this is a fantastic approach that inspires ways I think developers could go into such a genre and think about, hey, how can we get someone else involved and jump into this game so that they can play it together? I just really loved what they were doing there. One I really wanted to highlight here was the timing-based mechanics that I touched briefly on. These are especially well suited for co-op. So for example, when executing a combo move, a standard attack, or trying to block incoming damage to any player on the field, both players can sync their inputs to maximize effectiveness. So if one misses, the other might still defend it and you'll save some health or land that extra bit of damage, which I thought was really neat and again, helped contribute to both people enjoying the title and being part of the experience. So this really created a great sense of shared strategy and rhythm as to what was going on in the fights. And when it works, it feels incredibly satisfying to pull off the special moves and also to land these little defensive and attack counters, etc. So I also really like this little bubble system that they have going on. So if you go somewhere and the other player is kind of left behind, then they'll just turn into a bubble like they're Baby Mario or something and just float along behind you. And I thought that was really good for just kind of keeping the pace up in terms of maybe one person is running ahead and exploring an area or solving a puzzle. And it doesn't mean that the flow of that gameplay is going to be inhibited because the other needed to take a drink of water or answer a text message or something. And so I really appreciated that this was a very thoughtful integration of co-op. It's not just like they allowed a second player to be controlled and then that's the title. It seems like Sabotage Studios really had a cooperative experience in mind, and I think that this game just really shines in that department. One of the things, however, that I will note is while co-op does enhance the engagement, as you can often expect in a lot of games like this, it does kind of inadvertently lower the difficulty because you have two people coordinating attacks and blocks, which makes enemies, I think, overall easier to manage and defend against, especially since characters revive mid-battle and healing items are largely unnecessary as a result already. But still, the co-op design is one of the game's standout innovations, and it's clear the developers, again, really thought about it and had it in mind when they were producing the title, which just shout out to them. I just thought that was so awesome. Another aspect really important to touch on just in the gameplay sense is exploration. It's a very important dynamic that you will participate in when playing a JRPG or just an RPG of any kind. And in Sea of Stars, exploration is one of the areas where the game feels a little undercooked for me. So early on, you're given a time of day device, which is essentially a tool that allows you to shift the time of day from day to night or whatnot. And it sounds promising, like the way in which it's integrated could be used for dynamic puzzles or opening up hidden paths or discovering new secrets. But in reality, you're mostly going to use it a handful of times for linear purposes that kind of drive the story forward or get you to the next part of an area that is story structured and specific. So it's kind of baffling, I think, just how little mileage this tool gets throughout the game. I feel like they could have added a lot more depth by having a day-night cycle, or maybe areas kind of play or feel different, or you see different enemies day or night, or maybe you shift day to night in this area and then you have to travel to another area that's now opened up some paths or opportunities for you. There was a lot of things that I was brainstorming and thinking about across the course of the game that I thought this tool was likely going to be used for, but never really seemed fully integrated into the world design, which I kind of found to be the case across the board when exploring the world in Sea of Stars. Now, that doesn't mean anything about the world itself in the sense of its visual diversity, which is huge. There's a lot of different biomes, different geography that show off the developer's love for pixel art, which is fantastic. And there's a lot of artistic flair here, whether that's in the lush forests or the eerie ruins, and the environments are genuinely beautiful. But that beauty doesn't really translate into meaningful interaction with the world. You're just mostly running from point A to B. Occasionally you're solving a light puzzle, as I mentioned, or flipping a switch. But other than that, there's very little incentive to explore off the beaten path, and the game rewards no curiosity, which I wish there was a little bit more of that kind of flexibility in the world design. I would have liked if the world felt more explorable from that sense. And a big reason why is, aside from the fact there's not a whole lot of extra exploring to do outside of following the standard plot arc, is that the loot itself is a major letdown in this game. The enemies, they rarely drop anything useful, which, unless the combat is to push you forward through a dungeon or to get to the next area, just makes combat itself feel like more of a time sink than a rewarding challenge if you're out there grinding. Because there are a number of JRPGs and RPGs I can think of where the best weapons in the game or the most experience you can get all come from exploring to some little nook in the world or fighting the right enemy 10,000 times to get a special weapon. And while maybe not everyone would commit to that, I think it's really nice to know, like, oh, this is in the game, and if I want to take it to its 100 to the full limit, then I could go out and get this weapon or do this thing or max out my characters in such a way. So you're just really going to find the occasional chest around the world with some generic items inside. Oftentimes cooking ingredients are around as well, which you can scrape up to cook dishes. But for me, this kind of strips away a lot of the excitement of discovery, which is supposed to be a core part of any RPG's experience in the exploration department. Even then, the co-op mechanics, while they shine really good in combat, don't really carry over into the exploration of the world in a meaningful way. The game is, of course, designed to be a solo playing experience, but I would have liked if Zale and Valerie as a team were more involved in solving puzzles than they really are here. There are some times where you have to position one on a button so the other can go and run around to some other place. But it's a really missed opportunity that more puzzles were not built and more traversal challenges were not thought of with teamwork in mind for exploring the world. I would have liked to have seen more of that. In short, I really ended up feeling like exploration in Sea of Stars is beautiful, but simultaneously kind of a hollow experience. The environments are crafted with a ton of care, but the gameplay doesn't necessarily give you much reason to engage with all of that care that's been taken around the world beyond some surface level traversal. And that's kind of a shame because the potential was clearly there. It was just never fully realized for me. I would have just liked to have seen more depth overall to the world. Another thing really standing out to me, because you're going to do quite a bit of it throughout this title, is the cooking. So every RPG game now has to have a little cooking mechanic, it seems like. And in Sea of Stars, it starts out really charming and visually delightful. It's got some really great animations and art that kind of pair along every dish that are genuinely satisfying to just see the ingredients coming together and getting cooked up into a hearty meal. It really feels like a cozy ritual as you sit by the fireplace and kind of rest your team and get their health back and such. And the pixel art here really for sure shines, which I thought was cool. It's just one of those little details, one of those little added touches that they didn't have to do, but somebody on the team just loved making little food pixel art, and they did a fantastic job with it. So it's just, again, it's a small touch that adds to the game and makes it feel like the developers really cared about those details. However, one of the things I'll say is that as the game progresses, the system starts to wear a little thin. You know, cooking meals one by one becomes pretty tedious, especially when you're trying to stock up before a dungeon or a boss fight. I would have really liked maybe a batch cooking or an auto cook option so that I could just click a button and move on with my life and have my recovery items, as opposed to doing this repeat where I'm running down lists of eligible cooking items and changing their quantities so I can produce them, etc. I eventually found myself just defaulting to a few reliable recipes early on and just sticking to those. And if I didn't have the ingredients, then I just didn't have the ingredients. I didn't really end up needing them because the game wasn't challenging me in the combat department too much. And by the later stages of the game, I was just defaulting to buying meals from vendors instead because that was faster, it was easier, far more practical to get the exact food items that I wanted. The cooking items really only end up being useful for healing back your health or gaining back points so that you can commit to skills and such. But I thought the cooking system had the potential to be a meaningful part of the gameplay loop, maybe allowing you to produce food that contains buffs, or finding rare ingredients, or exploration-based recipes that you pick up along the way, as opposed to purchasing them at a vendor. But instead it ends up feeling a little more underutilized as a feature that kind of fades into the background the further on you progress into the title. Another little miscellaneous thing that kind of shows up in a lot of RPGs these days is mini games. So my favorite of these of this cloth has always been The Witcher 3's Gwent. I wanted to actually play Gwent more than I wanted to play Witcher 3. At some point, I just ended up traveling the world and trying to complete the entire Gwent sets and beat all the Gwent players. So I do have a great appreciation for these in a title. And Sea of Stars has this one called Wheels, which is this tavern mini game that will show up as you travel the world, and is introduced, fairly early on into the title. It's clearly meant to be like a fun little diversion, little collectible-driven, strategy-light board game you can play in various inns throughout the title. But the presentation, while solid, has its own custom board, unique tokens, even a little bit of lore baked in. On first impression, it just didn't land very well for me. The style of play for me personally felt immediately uninteresting in a lot of ways. It's not that the game was broken or poorly made, but the mechanics, the visual design, it just didn't really grab me in a way that made me want to continue playing or learning the minigame's nuances or strategy. And so I gave it a shot. That was enough for me. There's no hook or compelling reason to dive deeper, especially when the core gameplay loop of getting through the story and the combat was already starting to feel like it was dragging in a lot of areas. I just had to step away from that minigame. Maybe it would have been nice if one or two rounds of that game were more baked into the narrative, such as in Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. I think that's what the second one's called. I can't even remember anymore. They had a ton of minigames that you were required to do to progress the story, and some may or may not like that. I think it's okay if you do it for like one or two players or rounds or whatnot. And that's a shame, because minigames, as I mentioned, can be a great way to kind of break up the pacing and add a little flavor to the world. But in this case, Wheels for me felt more like a checkbox feature, as in they wanted to add something in, and this was what they came up with. And it's technically there, but didn't offer much in the way of engagement or reward for me as a player of the game. And it's the kind of system that may appeal to completionists or players who really want to explore every corner of the game itself, but for the most part, it's likely to be a one-and-done experience, especially since, as I mentioned, the core of the game is really kind of lacking in some senses. There are a few other miscellaneous gameplay elements worth highlighting that don't quite fit into some of these main categories that I've discussed, but still do a really good job of shaping the overall gaming experience. So one of the first ones I wanted to discuss was puzzles. So they're a great example because they can be surprisingly satisfying when they hit the mark. One early standout involves kind of manipulating these mirrors and beams of light to unlock a hidden chamber. And while simple, it's pretty well executed and feels rewarding. Unfortunately, a lot of these moments are scattered and infrequent, just leaving you wishing the game leaned into them more. I would have loved to have seen this more overall. I mentioned earlier add some co-op puzzles, traversal challenges in, but just the frequency of these needed to increase, which I thought would have been really great. Traversal comes in the form of the typical for most of these JRPGs. You start by just walking around the world all slow, and then you get a boat. Now you can travel across the ocean and go to different continents, and then eventually you can fly, and then you can fly to secret spots, or you can land wherever you want on the world. There's even a early, kind of quirky and funny game mechanic where giants are literally picking you up in these stone balls and throwing you across the map. Kind of a cool way to get around the fact that you're kind of locked in on a continent without a boat, but you can only walk. So fun little touch that I thought added quite a bit of personality to Sea of Stars traversal options. But despite these varied methods, the world itself doesn't continue to encourage re-exploration of these areas until you get to the very, very late stages of the game. And so travel, again, is still mostly linear, though you have this beautiful world to, steer your boat around in or fly around in. But once you've kind of passed through an area, there's rarely a reason to return because there's not, fancy loot options. The enemies are likely very underleveled compared to you, unless you're going out and collecting the one kind of conch, rainbow conch, item throughout the world for these random rewards in a city. Then you might not get much mileage out of this if you want to explore some more. I always think too it's good to mention the technical aspects of the game. Just in a hardware experience, the controller responsiveness was excellent, and the movement feels really snappy. The timing of windows for combat inputs, whether you're attacking or blocking, are really tight and satisfying, and you can really tell when it lands, and you really know that if it didn't land, that was totally on you. Which I love when a game's gameplay is that tight and well designed. And so there are a few areas where the game's polish really shines through, making for moment-to-moment gameplay to feel smooth and tactile. And I'm really happy that one of those was in just a excellent setup from a controller mechanics perspective. In the grand scheme of things, Sea of Stars has a lot of really great ideas, but the gameplay itself didn't quite hold up for me. I would have liked to have seen more out of this title. The co-op combat is fun and keeps both players engaged throughout, but also makes battles a little bit too easy, and it doesn't scale because you have extra players. And especially since characters can revive mid-fight, I feel like healing items just don't end up mattering as much as you would hope, ultimately. Exploration looks beautiful, but that's about it. You know, it mostly feels linear. And the time of day mechanics are barely used. The cooking starts off charming, gets tedious kind of fast, and I ended up ignoring it by the end. Wheels, the tavern minigame, was a one and done for me, just didn't really grab me and get my interest. And on the plus side though, controllers' responsiveness was excellent. There's a few puzzles that are genuinely satisfying, but I just wanted a little more out of this game overall. I would have also loved to have seen the systems evolve over the course of the game, but they didn't do that enough to keep me hooked in on the title. I even at certain occasions found myself falling asleep at the wheel because the game was just not drawing me in. And this is such a rare occurrence that I can't even recall when other titles did this, and it happened to me. So I will add, however, it's a fantastic RPG for playing alongside a loved one. It was so fun to enjoy this genre with my wife and kind of introduce her to it, and I think Sea of Stars is the best stop for that. It's just got great and fantastic co-op integration, and I think it's worth experiencing for that reason alone. That was a lot on the gameplay side, but of course that's just one big aspect of any title. So next I want to discuss Sea of Stars' story and narrative overall. So the game honestly starts painfully slow. I was about 7 hours in and still wondering when the actual story would pick up, because for most of that time, you're just these two blank slates. I don't say they're like mannequins with wigs on, just wandering around an island before an eclipse. And that is the story for the first 7 hours of the game. Adds a little dramatic to say, of course. There is some world building, character introductions and interactions, but Zale and Valerie, the main characters here, feel hollow pretty early on. They have a friend, Garl, who comes along for the journey, and on the other hand, Garl is way cooler, and he has way more character development and way more personality than any individual in the whole game, and it's weird that a sidekick outshines so hard the leads. He basically becomes, in my mind, the main character for the run of the title, and his overall story is the best aspect of the title's narrative. Just thought that was incredibly weird overall, and I will say yes, that does in some ways mimic how older JRPGs handled their protagonists, where the protagonist is really just a shell for the gamer to fill into the experience and just be part of the world and its characters. But where I feel Sabotage Studios did it a little differently and was misguided is that they gave Zale and Valerie dialogue and personalities, which is something that these older games did not bake in, because the player is really kind of the stand-in for that in most occasions. So what that ended up developing for me is an expectation that these aspects of the characters will get built out over the course of the game. They're going to develop, they're going to have dialogue, and they're going to go through traumatic things. They're going to change them as people across the course of the game. But throughout Sea of Stars, in fact, this never really happens. They remain fairly flat and neutralized characters. I did not like where the title took these characters, Zale and Valerie, if anywhere at all, to be honest. And this aspect kind of reeks across the title as a result, whereas it has fairly solid world building otherwise with many of the people you interact with. Other party members, I will say, they do get some, and recurring characters, do get some pretty steady amount of character development across the course of the game and become pretty interesting throughout the run, especially as you get towards the end. So it's something that you'd want to keep in mind going into the title, but those first 10-ish hours of the game before you begin to meet this cast of characters, the pirates, and some of the other like otherworldly beings that you'll interact with, you're going to be feeling like it's pretty lacking. Eventually the stakes do rise in the title and some bad things start going down, but it's not really until you're about 60 or 70% through the game, and that's a long time to go without any meaningful tension in a 40-hour game experience. The story up to that point for me just feels really padded with filler, tedious obstacles, fetch quests that delay your confrontation with the bosses throughout the course of the game and send you on these random tangents as opposed to pursuing, you know, the main threat. There's a little lore around the antagonist that comes about, but the lack of character reactions during revelatory moments really pulled me out of the experience. Like, your protagonist should be freaking out at some of the things that go on in this title as they're experiencing them and as they are being victim to them, but instead they're just complete silence often hanging over the game and in some of the game's peak moments. And if something crazy does happen, oftentimes what you get is just like a little dialogue blurb above their heads that's just like 3 exclamation marks, "Oh!" And a little like Zale's face will go, "Ah!" And I'm just like, you could have done a little more, animate the sprites or give them better dialogue. I think that's something that a lot of the older JRPG titles did well, because they would have it to where the sprites themselves were reacting due to the fact that those sprites don't have character, right? Like Chrono Trigger is the best example here because that's who Sabotage was very inspired by. Chrono doesn't speak, but you know through his actions and the way his sprite changes when things are going on that he is reacting. He does have a personality to these things, and I just wish we got a little more out of that, out of this title. And to that effect, the narrative overall is just, again, very linear. There's minimal player choice, branching paths, etc., and the dialogue remains pretty serviceable and often flat. And I played as Zale. And I gotta say that Zale, he's a cool character, but his character portrait is not on point. He really just looks like some early 2000s spiky-haired dweeb. Kind of looks like Justin Burfield playing Reese in Malcolm in the Middle, or like the main singer for Yellow Card. Those things alone just made it really hard for me to take him seriously. That's what I took from the game mostly. You know, JRPGs and RPG games, they need to have a fantastic story rooted in the ground that will carry you forward no matter what else is going on in the game. And here for me, the narrative failed to emotionally inspire me to push along outside of wanting to beat the game and, of course, play the game with my wife. And the game ends in such a way that either requires you to go full completionist mode and dump an extra 10 hours into a collect-a-thon experience to get a more holistic ending, or settle for a half-measure ending, you know, both of which do not end with any particular satisfaction to the overall story. The main characters end up feeling poorly developed. I think they would have been very much better off as mute characters, because if that was the case, it would have pushed the developers to write around this fact and build out the world itself much more in respect to that, and as a result, likely have been more in-depth and more detailed, and that's where a lot of the character building and world development shines anyway. So I think it would have benefited from it, and the game would have also benefited, I think, from a less linear narrative structure overall. All right, moving on to sound design. So voice acting, it's absent. It's a retro style RPG, so I will not have much to comment on there, but I will say that what they end up replacing it with is the standard dialogue scrolling sound where it kind of mimics a character talking. And I'll just say that this sound was pretty obnoxious and distracting. Just something about the choice just didn't really work for me. But otherwise, Sabotage did a really solid job of reinforcing the retro vibe. The attacks land with a satisfying crunch. The spells have a really nice elemental flair. The ambient sounds themselves help bring the pixel environments to life. And there's a really clear effort to make the world feel tactile and responsive through audio, and they just did a fantastic job with that. The soundtrack in Sea of Stars 2 is no sleeper. There are standout moments from Eric Brown, who was the main composer, especially with contributions from Yasunori Mitsuda, who I mentioned at the top was the composer for Chrono Trigger and Xenogears, and they both have really nicely integrated styles that come together to produce what is a fantastic soundtrack overall. Early tracks have a really nice tone with a few dungeon themes kind of carrying the real atmosphere, but outside of those highlights, I would say that the music outside of the battles themselves really becomes kind of fades into the background a bit. It's good, not always consistently memorable, but I did quite like it, especially the battle themes. So, and one call out I'll give is that the combat music is so groovy and fun and energetic that it always really kept up the spirit of the title no matter what else was going on. There are over 130 tracks with biome-specific themes, boss battle songs, elite encounters that kind of ramp up with the music. And I just love the soundtrack quite a bit, even if about half into it, those songs weren't really hitting my mind in the sense of I'm gonna be able to imagine the song and hear it right now. Like I can do that with a lot of games. Again, we're just gonna talk about Chrono Trigger because that's where we're at these days for this title. When I think of Chrono Trigger, I can hear songs in my head from the game that I know just because they're so memorable. And I'm not getting that with Sea of Stars, but I love the soundtrack, especially the battles. Finally, the big star of the show is its visual experience. Sea of Stars is a visually rich game that clearly reflects a deep love for pixel art. I don't think I've played a game with pixel art that is as put together as Sea of Stars is. The sprite work is consistently impressive. There's a lot of vibrant environments with a wide range of geographical styles that make exploration feel lush and interesting and fresh and dynamic. And enemy designs stand out in particular. They're really cool, and there's a remarkable diversity in their appearance and their style, and each one of them feels thoughtfully crafted rather than recycled or generic from, other enemies or other games. So I found that to be a really impressive aspect of Sea of Stars. A striking thing that really stood out for me in this department that I didn't quite expect with a 2D sprite-based game was the lighting. The dynamic lighting and the shadows are super impressive, especially as you're using the time, day to night changer that I was mentioning. And these things, while they're not necessary, they add such a kind of sophisticated depth to the atmosphere in ways that really elevate the visual storytelling. And I love that you could change the time of day and kind of see the environment visually interacting with it. I did want to note that I picked this up across the course of the game, and there are a couple of artistic choices that don't land as well for me. The anime style cutscenes, for example, feel pretty low budget and disconnected from the rest of the game's aesthetic because the art style clashes a lot with the pixel art, which is fantastic. But as a result, the game kind of attempts to do some mixed media shifting. So you'll have the 2D pixel art, you'll have some 3D transitions, you'll have these anime segments, and all of this kind of feels jarring when you put it together, and shifting between the two creates like an inconsistency that kind of has me taking an immersion break from the title, which I would have preferred not to. I would have preferred to be locked in visually across the course. So instead of enhancing the experience, those shifts do detract from the cohesive visual identity of the game for me, which is otherwise well established in my mind. All right, so ultimately, I had a lot to say about the game, I think, but I just want to take all those thoughts and kind of meld them together. So Sea of Stars is a visually striking, auditorily fantastic experience, but an uneven one at that. The turn-based combat and modern co-op mode really bring some innovation, but do suffer from a lack of depth and challenge. The exploration is beautiful, yet a little shallow. It's missing the rewards that make discovery exciting. I think that would have been a great way for them to continue to build on what was a solid foundation for this game if they did a little bit more of it. There's a number of side mechanics, whether that's the cooking and the mini games. They start out strong and interesting, but quickly become more tedious and do not evolve over the course of the game. And the narrative struggles with pacing and character development, though some of the side characters do kind of shine through. The world building elements do come together and develop well. They do add value, but the story itself, the narrative, just not particularly interesting, especially from our protagonist. And I felt like that is the linchpin of a fantastic RPG. It needs to be there, it needs to be good. I would say though that despite just a couple of technical glitches and stylistic inconsistencies, the game really captures a nostalgic, retro vibe with its pixel art and its engaging soundtrack. So overall, Sea of Stars really has the potential to be a fantastic game. I don't think it fully capitalizes on it, I don't think it fully delivers, but it does make for a very enjoyable yet flawed adventure, especially one to enjoy with a loved one or a friend. The co-op is just fantastic in this game. It is something that I just haven't seen another title quite do the same way, and I think it was done excellently here. So yeah, overall, those were some of my thoughts on Sea of Stars. I'm curious if you've played the game, and if you had different thoughts, or if you liked things that maybe I thought weren't as great, or you had different opinions. Would love for you to share those please drop them in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Would love to have you along for the journey, talk about the games I'm playing, hear your thoughts on those games, and also hear what you're playing, or maybe you have a great recommendation for me. I'm always looking for those. Well, until next time, stay well, stay healthy. I'll see you next week. All right, peace.